Christopher Plummer, sometime bad boy of the theater, should be opening in Stratford tonight. He's to play Antony to Zoe Caldwell's Cleopatra. And theater patrons think enough of this talented young Canadian that tickets are now almost sold out until October. He's fresh from a triumph in New York as Pizarro in the powerful drama Royal Hunt of the Sun, and from filming Oedipus Rex in Greece while its recent domestic revolution surged about him. Plummer, who was born in Toronto and raised in Montreal, walks around London with film director Terry Filgate and talks about London and himself with his customary candor. Tonight, part one of a two-part look at Christopher Plummer, the actor and the man.
I don't really feel that I'm an expatriate of Canada because I do go back every now and then and keep in touch. I do go and play at Stratford as much as I can. I only left because I feel it's very important for one's work to work in all sorts of other countries and then go back to your own country, bringing the influence other countries have given you, which always widens the work of others as well as yourself. I find that London is the sort of place to be in the 60s. Everything's happening here, fashion. The kids are absolutely marvelous. They've set the pattern for success in this country, really. With one exception, they don't seem to have much humor. They take themselves very seriously, and I kind of wish they were like the 20s. They're almost like the 20s, mad, sort of 23 skidoo kind of wildness, but they haven't got the humor of the 20s. Perhaps they're not quite as desperate as the people who were aware in those days more of what the disaster to come. But I wish they had more fun. I wish they had more humor being kinky. Never boring in London because the weather's always changing. There's no such thing as climate over here. It's just good old weather. I think today, for instance, we're probably going to have not only 4 but 5 seasons descend on us. Very warm winter, and now that we're into the spring, it's starting to freeze. The wonderful thing about London that I love is it's about the only city I really know where you can walk for miles without getting tired. It's the walking city of the world, I think, because it has so many attractive parks, like this one in Holland Park, and millions of others that in little squares all dotted all over. That's the pleasure of walking in London. The thing about London is that I don't think even the Burtons can walk down the street, Richard and Elizabeth, and really not be bothered. People don't bother you here. They pretend not to. Of course, you know that they've stopped and turned around a little bit, but they pretend not to notice you. It's nice. It isn't an invasion of privacy like it is in America. Or Italy, or France even. People, particularly Italy, they mob famous actors. And the paparazzi are always around taking photographs, and it's embarrassing. Not me, but really famous stars. I get embarrassed when people sort of come up. It's a pleasure to be recognized in a way. You can't sort of, you'd hate it if nobody did, but it is slightly embarrassing because then the other people, if you're not too famous or you're not recognized, will say, who's he, you know? And what are you staring at him for? They think you're somebody else. I usually sign Richard Burton when they come up and ask me for my autograph. Because I'm terrified they're going to say, who's Christopher Plummer? Well, the Sound of Music, I tried to get out of about 16 times after I'd said yes to it, after long periods of trying to make up my mind if I should do it or not. My eye for the commercial success was, I'm afraid, very strong, and it is important for artists to do big commercial smash hits. But I did try to get out of it, because I thought, oh my Lord, what have I done playing with all these children? Children and dogs steal scenes, and what have I done? And the part isn't very exciting. But Dick Zanuck, who ran 20th Century Fox, said he'd sue me if I didn't play. So I played under duress with a marvelous director whom I like very much, Robert Wise, whom if I'd been him, I would have fired me long ago for my sort of cheek and rudeness to him. Well, I remember meeting some of the Trapp family in Austria, and the cousin of one of the Trapps is a brilliant, he works with his hands brilliantly on stone, and he's a sculptor, and I've told him, I thought, I'm very happy to meet the only talented member of the Trapp family, and I asked him what his uncle was like, and he said he was the biggest bore. This was through an interpreter, because I don't speak Austrian, and biggest bore that for miles around. And I said, well, that's the character I'm playing. I wanted to be a pianist very much. And I did study for a while, and I really, my ambition was to be a concert pianist. And then we had quite a crazy school because we had people like Oscar Peterson and Maynard Ferguson. That was the school band, and not a bad school band in those days. And we all used to go in and play the piano at breaks during the school day. And I got very interested in music, and I've always, since a kid I was fascinated. But I realized that acting came easier, and it didn't, require sort of 8 hours a day of practice and tremendous discipline, which I certainly in those days didn't have at all. And so I drifted as a drifter into acting, really, from school. And Ruth Chatterton introduced me to Guthrie McClintock and Catherine Cornell, who then, really for the next 3 years, started me in the theater completely. I played about 3 things with Catherine Cornell. And she was the last of the great actress managers in America, which has died out. But they were marvelous in those days because they were terribly loyal to their companies and terribly loyal to their actors, and they always made sure that Chris Plummer had a part in, well, it was something that has gone, a graciousness in the theater that has disappeared now. It's all tough and hard, and David Merrick and very big business. I suppose the first important part I had in New York was playing Catherine Cornell's son-in-law in a very good part in Christopher Fry's The Darkest Light Enough, and we took it on tour first right across America, which she always did to make her money back before she opened. And one night in Pittsburgh I got very high, and I'd been up all night, and I missed the understudy rehearsal, and I missed half hour, and it was just total disaster. And I walked in, and Guthrie McClintock was furious, her husband, and he said, Miss Cornell wants to see you in her dressing room. And I walked to the door, and there she was. Her maid was stroking her hair, and as she talked, this furious, sort of very intense, low-keyed, white-heat temper, her maid was stroking faster and faster and faster, and she was saying things like, "Oh, Christopher, if you can't sort of turn up on time, if you're going to be as undisciplined as this, and I'm afraid you will not open in New York. I'm afraid you're going to have to be fired. And I'm going out there this afternoon and watch every scene you do, and if there's a simple hint that you're shaky at all, you're out." And I remember standing there, and I was so kind of dazed with the drink the night before that I sort of looked at her and I thought, Miss Cornell, you're really giving one of the best performances you've ever given, I thought, in a naughty way. Then I wondered at the end of this long spiel of hers if I could ask her, do you think I could have some money to pay the bar bill, something, I don't know. But I've never been more frightened in my life. I went upstairs, and my understudy poured me full of black coffee, and every time I went on for each entrance, there she was in the wings, watching, and it was a terrifying afternoon, and I knew I'd been fired. I left the theater, and just as I was leaving, some woman came out of her dressing room and said, "Oh, Mr. Plummer, I did enjoy your performance so much this afternoon." And I looked back, trying not to look at Miss Cornell, whose friend she was, and Miss Cornell gave me the high sign. It was all right. But it taught me to work from then on, and from then on I knew how to sort of be on time and discipline myself to work in the theater. And from then it was uphill and rather pleasant for the next 5 years. And that was the first, from the lark, I managed to get Henry V in Canada because Michael Langham asked me to appear at Stratford that year, although I'd tried years before to get in and was ignored, probably quite rightly. But he asked me as the first Canadian to head the company, because previous to that they'd had stars like James Mason, Alec Guinness. So it was quite an exciting year for me. But it goes to prove that you have to prove yourself in other countries before your own country asks you back. I think it's true not only of Canada, I think it's true of every country, really. Every hometown boy is always sort of taken for granted slightly. Not now, but when you begin. I think the worst thing an actor can do is the thing that people expect an actor to do is to talk about himself grandiloquently and go on. And of course, I suppose we all do, and I do like talking about myself and being flattered by people who ask me questions. But there's nothing duller to most audiences or spectators than an actor's private life. There really isn't, because an actor should be a mystery. And yet, unfortunately today, with columns and television and terrible sort of prying into one's private life, they become public property. So we're forced to do interviews because if we don't, then we don't get as much publicity as we might want. And if it's intelligently done, it actually can be a great pleasure, because it helps your work to be able to try and talk about yourself, which is murder and terribly hard to do, because an actor must need a script before he gets in front of a camera. Well, you can start off by being fearfully sincere and terribly charming and winning your audience and trying to say, please love me. And that's, I suppose, what we really do want, all of us, because we're all, I think actors are pretty misplaced people who need security and need confidence all the time. But then, as the interview goes on and one relaxes after 15 brandies, one can sort of try and be as outspoken as one can. I hate guarded interviews and people who are terribly careful about what they say politically, because then audiences really shut off and don't want to hear.
If somebody asks you awkward questions, you just say you don't want to answer like that.
No, I would rather answer an awkward question than...
You like drinking, for instance.
Very much. And the next question is, am I a drunk? Yes, I am. When except when I'm working, producers take note. But no, I don't mind. I don't mind that. I think the more provocative an interview, the better. A producer in New York, a very famous one called Kermit Bloomgarden, who perhaps was the best producer in New York because he was really a producer in the sense of the word. He was able to understand the story, tighten the script. He knew what to say to the author and the director. He was one of the best producers and the most adventurous that Broadway has ever had. He was in the sort of class of Jed Harris and people like that. And I've worked with Kermit, and he's a friend of mine, and I've known him, and yet he never stops asking me the same old question. Why do all you good actors, I say good actors, flattering myself, why do all you good actors drink heavily? And I thought of that. I thought, oh, that son of a bee, he's going to spread it around and I'm not going to get work. Because Americans actually take drinking far more seriously than the English do. And I thought, no, that's going to be very dangerous. But now I don't mind, and I found the answer. It's because the more you give to an audience, which is a tremendous amount that you give during a night, if you care about your work, the more you spill out of yourself of either loathing or loving them, and getting loathing and loving back, it is a tremendous letdown when the evening is over. You've given an awful lot of your own personality with just the reward of applause at the end, which is a marvelous reward, but it isn't quite enough to fill the rest of the night. You're very keyed up, and the experience that you have had is far greater than the one the audience, unfortunately, has not had, and you must sort of anesthetize yourself and relax yourself to run down through the night, because you're very keyed, and it's rather like taking, I suppose, drugs for jazz musicians. You must have a drink, and drink a lot. And there's also certain kind of unspoken camaraderie in the theater that if you're not a drinker, you're not a good actor, which is phony. But there is something to it. You've got to run down your metabolism and your energy with the boys. You have to prove yourself to be not only a good actor, but a good drinking companion. And I think that's right. Nothing wrong with that, because it's part of life. Unless you live it to the full, how are you going to act to the full? I don't take myself seriously in the sense of worrying about my image, because I haven't got one to worry about. Thank heaven. I like to be as versatile as I can be anyway, so I don't want to be labeled one thing. I don't take my career seriously in the sense of what is going to happen next, and the next job, and the money I'm going to make, because that's, you could die from that, out of sheer boredom. You've got to have a sense of humor about the ridiculousness of certainly the film business, and the theater too, in a way. Otherwise, you could be paranoid and totally sort of epileptic about your métier. But I take myself seriously as an actor when I work. That's all. I mean, for instance, I know that no matter how hot I am or cold, there are 5 other actors that have been thought of before me. I may be lucky enough to be among those 7 that are thought of for a project. But I certainly know that Richard Burton, for instance, is going to get something first, perhaps, and then if he's not so hot next year, Peter O'Toole will, or Marlon Brando will, and then maybe I come 4th or 5th or 6th or even 10th. This is my Arthur hat. I was wearing in the English countryside. Arthur is a discotheque in New York, which Sybil Burton started a long time, and all of us put in a little money to keep it going. So I thought it was dead right for the English countryside.
You feel you're the English country gentleman now or not?
It's the closest I'll ever get. Max, I wonder if you'd mind measuring. I've left all my measurements in Canada. If you could measure it for Oedipus or something. We're doing it. We're doing the costumes.
Well, in costume.
They need my well, I know you're not going to make them.
No. Max, can I have full set of measurements?
You'll make it, leave it up?
Leave the coat.
Okay.
Length.
Neck to waist. Push me on my unflattering side, Max.
I'll turn you around the 8.5. Elbow, 20.5.
I don't like reading too much about a classical role because if too many people have theories on it, then it isn't fresh when you come to do it. It's mannerisms of famous people, like if you're doing a film on Churchill or something, or which I've never had the fortune to do, but if you sort of very well-known contemporary figure, you've got to study, the gestures of the person. And like when I did Hitler in New York, in Arturo Ui, for instance, I had to watch countless films of Hitler, the newsreels and things, to get every gesture. But when it's a classical role, you want to be fresh and new and not imitate somebody else and not read too vociferously. It's important to get the atmosphere of the time and the historical fact, but it isn't. I'm not an academic about it. I don't go into long studies because I always feel if you do too much, it rests on the page. You're not doing what the author intended. Because most authors who write, classical writers, always use poetic license for their characters. I mean, Shakespeare never wrote a historical truth, really. Each time I went to a country, I got in on the end of a movement, which is very funny because I studied it for a while. I observed at Actors Studio, but I came in on the end of it when it was no longer fashionable to mumble, the end of the sort of group theater period. And then when I got to London, I got in the end of the John Osborne period. I'm always getting, I had to go back to the classics. There was nothing left for me to do. I couldn't be I didn't have any present day sort of image. But I think the smart thing to do is to have learnt, and I was lucky to have seen both styles in each country, and to get the American style of acting and the English and try and combine the two. I don't go to the theater much anymore, but I feel there are so few things that I really want to see in the theater. I go to the theater to see either marvelous writing or marvelous acting, and there's very rarely that you see that now. Also, the production of going to the theater is awful. The sort of, you're getting the tickets, getting the car, the traffic, going in and being jostled, your drink sort of thrown out of your hand at intermission by some. The whole thing is a production, and I don't go very much. Also, I get terribly jealous if the acting is too good, so I want to be up there, you see, and if it's too good, I get uneasy, and if it's not good, I feel I want to get up there and show them how to do it. So I'm a bad audience, rather like a bad passenger. I'm not a difficult guy to get on with. I'm only difficult when I'm impatient with people who don't understand. Temperament has nothing to do with lack of professionalism. Temperament is essential. And if something is wrong, I will say so if I feel it wrong instinctively. I've given up feeling that I have to be liked. I realize that I think anybody in any profession, if they love their work, should just forget about that. I think when you're young, you have to be liked, and particularly actors who thrive on being loved, and being applauded for every little thing they do. I've given that up. I sometimes enjoy hating the people I work with. Not violently, but I mean disliking them. Wrong word, hate. I can use it sometimes. It's sometimes very valuable. Particularly if it's a play in which it demands that you have a sort of no ambiance at all with the other character. It's very useful not to particularly like them. And you kind of keep it at that level. You don't even try to get to know them off the stage. You savor it. No, I've given up being, wanting to be liked. It's a waste of time. Nobody told me it was the most exclusive. Now you frighten me. I never thought of it that way. It was simply a townhouse that we bought 3 years ago. And it was in the center of London, and it was very easy to get to the theatre and back, and shopping districts. Fortnum and Mason's and all the good shops are all around the corner. Marvelous beef sold down on Mount Street, which is just down here. It seemed a perfect ideal spot. I never thought of it in terms of sort of a symbol of success to live in Mayfair. Actually, Mayfair isn't very fashionable anymore. The most fashionable parts are now in Pimlico becoming fashionable, and places like Chelsea and Putney even.
Well, your house must have cost an arm and a leg.
Well, no, it didn't, actually. We had a marvelous bargain. And the funny thing about it is that... Come here, Jerry. Is that in a magazine article just recently, it very snobbishly said that Mayfair was not the place to live anymore because there are only 4 earls living here now. I felt very slighted about that. A lot of actors say that audiences are alike all over the world. I think they're nuts. I mean, London audiences laugh more than New York audiences, for instance. They're much more giving to a comedy. Actually, they laugh at anything, I've discovered. And New York audiences are slightly more jaded and perhaps a little bit, in a way, more sophisticated, strangely enough. But the thing I like about playing in London is that, particularly in plays that are familiar, like the classics, is that the audience knows exactly what you're doing, and they come to see what you do with a famous role, not what the famous role is doing to you. In New York, they come to see hits, unfortunately, because of the power of the press. Actually, the press in London is now becoming almost as powerful. I can see it happening here, which is very disastrous. Critics are being made stars. They appear on television. They have to put makeup on, and they're constantly interviewed, and their opinions are noted with great sort of reverence. I've had nice things said about me by critics, by the best ones, and terrible things said. And I usually look at the terrible things now. I used to love getting great notices. Who doesn't? You know, and a bit proud. I used to cut them out and put them in there. I don't do that anymore because I look for criticism because it does help your work, if it's discerning. Audiences in Stratford Canada are some of the best that I've ever played to. First of all, they come because it's an occasion to come, and they've traveled a long way to get there, and they're prepared to enjoy themselves. Because if they don't enjoy themselves, the trip's been worthless. But they're probably the best audiences out there. Also, they haven't been conditioned to a style, or they're not as familiar with the plays of Shakespeare or the classics as people in metropolises are. And so it's like playing a play for the first time to them. They're like a new, fresh audience. I know in front of an audience immediately if I'm off the beaten track, because you always have one ear on the audience, and they are guiding you, and actually they're the best director in the world. You can learn more from an audience than you can from any director in the last analysis, and that's why you can build a performance out throughout a season. Even a bad audience, even an audience that is indifferent, you have to work harder, and you find sometimes that if it challenges you to sort of pull in the performance so tight and control it that you finally got an indifferent audience, then that is proof that you have power over them. Now, in films, it's totally different because you have no one to react to except the crew behind the camera, which I always use, being a theater actor. I have to use people as to bounce off and react. So I kind of use them as an audience when I'm working. I have to, otherwise it's too cold a medium. I must have some immediate response. And the director, of course, I'm playing for. And if other actors are working, I kind of think of them and as an audience. except in a close-up, where I have to, in a film, I think, shut off completely and concentrate only on my own private thoughts, whatever they may be. And in film, it really is the same as the theater, because you can be thinking of something totally different to what you're saying, and if that colors in the right way what you're speaking, it's just as effective and right in both mediums as it is if you're only thinking of what you're saying.
Just even doing, say, a television interview, are you aware if you get any feedback, how you're coming over now?
Yeah, in a television show, I can see, when I'm talking to you, and I can see the boys behind sort of either yawning or being attentive, or if they're restless, I think, oh, God, I've got to hurry up. And then I'm boring myself, too, at the same time. And we're aware of all those things. I think it all starts when you go into a restaurant, sit down, right away you notice I do anyway, I notice everything around me, and if I can tell the table at the end of the room, I honestly can, and I'm not boasting, but I can walk into a restaurant, if there's somebody sitting at the end of the room that I just have a feeling is against the grain for that evening, I know it's not going to be a fun evening, so I get the table at the very other end. And I can smell it when I go into a room. And I think we have to know that. We have to be instantly aware. It's like being aware of an audience's reaction to you. It sounds like a terribly conceited thing. It isn't. It's in fact the reverse. It's a rather, it's sort of a slightly inferiority complex that makes this happen in life to a lot of actors, I think. I'm not the only one. I mean, I've asked other actors and they find the same thing. Well, you know, I think we all do it ourselves. If you're sitting in a football game beside a loud guy that you just want to say, shut up, I know it's exciting. And I know that he just got it. Don't say it. You want to move, don't you? And you sense it before you sit down, the way people are dressed, by the way they speak. So the audience, in the last analysis, is the best director. Well, the relationship between an actor and the producer and director and the money men that are behind the industry has always been at odds. I think because from the very start, we, the actors, are on one side of the fence, and they are on the other. They're in the audience, as it were, directing, giving their sort of opinions, and we are on the other side of the footlights, whether it be in films or the theater, performing. And we have to be at odds, really. I think that's the natural animal that is in us as artists, director, producer. I think it has to stay almost as bad as the critic and the actor, having always to be at odds. They have to be. There's no way you can be a great pal of a producer. He may be your best friend, but when it comes to actually doing it, he's got to be a kind of critic. And the same goes with the director. And I think way back in history, when it started with, when only the theater was the only form of sort of entertainment, the actor was always the star, and the director didn't really exist. He was sort of a very good stage manager. And I think from that stemmed a sort of resentment of the actor, because the theater is the actor's medium. It is yours after you open on the first night. It's your play, and the director has nowhere to go anymore. You've taken over from him. You know more about the play and the piece and the work that you're doing than he does by now, even though he's guided you. You've taken over. And I think there's a slight resentment for directors in the theater. Then the movies came along. In the days of the star actors like Henry Irving and all the great actors of the past, they ran the theater. They were actor managers. They were the bosses. And they hired their little stage managers to work for them. And there was a sort of snobbiness about the director. I think it all kind of started somewhere way back there, this sort of slight estrangement between the two. And then the films came into being, and everything got out of control because money was number one, and getting things in on time, and actors became a commodity, and just people to be used. And there's a kind of, almost a sort of turnabout revenge. And the great stars haven't helped the actor's cause. The great movie stars who were just selling one personality. John Wayne, one personality. Cary Grant, one thing that he could do. And he may have been able to do other things, but was only allowed to do one thing, because the audience would have been fearfully disappointed had he changed his character. His box office would have dropped. And the studios built the star system up and made these people kings on one aspect of their personality. That didn't help the actor's cause. What I need from a director, and what I want from a director, is really to be left absolutely alone until such time as that I've found my performance, which I worked out carefully at home or in the theater or alone, where I have managed to fall on my behind and make an absolute fool of myself in private, get rid of all inhibitions that I have about the part, and then when I bring it onto the theater, let the director see it, and then, if he's a marvelous director, which I think is, if I wanted to direct, this is how I would direct, is to then take the best of what I've done, cut out the fussiness, and then start to build it by guiding me, because I can't see myself. Actually, they usually follow me wherever I go. I tell them, I just walk and they follow me. I get out and they wait for me down there.
Would you consider yourself a wealthy man?
No, I'm not wealthy at all, because I always, no matter how much money I make, I spend it pretty fast, because I like to live as well as I can. I love food and wine and drink and staying up late and compulsively sometimes picking up the tab. I enjoy that, so I don't keep my money. I wouldn't say I'm wealthy. I'm comfortable at the moment. Tomorrow I'll be broke.